More details expected very soon. US President Trump says Hamas has 24 hours to respond to his final proposal for a 60-day ceasefire in Gaza as Israel accepts the conditions. This comes as Palestinians bury 15 people killed in an overnight airstrike, according to reports, while hostage families urge a deal before Netanyahu's Washington visit. The Kremlin admits it cannot currently reach its objectives in Ukraine by diplomatic means, according to spokesman Dmitry Peskov. Peskov says Moscow prefers a political solution, but will continue its military operation until that's possible. Former Arsenal midfielder Thomas Partey has been charged with 5 counts of rape and 1 count of sexual assault involving 3 women, UK police say. The alleged offences happened between 2021 and 2022 and follow an investigation that began in February of 2022, according to the Met Police. French President Emmanuel Macron and UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer will co-chair a summit on July the 10th to strengthen Ukraine's defences, the Elysee Palace says. The meeting, held by video link, will focus on how seriously maintain Kiev's combat capability amid the ongoing war. Hezbollah is conducting a strategic review that could see it scale back its armed role without fully disarming, sources tell the Reuters news agency. Israeli strikes and a financial squeeze are pushing the group to consider its future, even as it keeps support among core backers. Brandy exporters. Taxes on major European brandy exporters starting on Saturday. A Commission spokesperson called the measures unfair and unjustified and inconsistent with international trade rules. Syria's Foreign Minister Assad al-Shabani says Damascus is ready to work with Washington to reinstate the 1974 disengagement agreement with Israel. After a call with US Secretary Marco Rubio, Shabani said Syria wants to cooperate despite being technically at war with Israel since 1948. Now, our top story this hour and breaking coming in now. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has held a phone call with US President Donald Trump. That confirmation coming from Zelensky's top aide, Andrei Yermak. He called the conversation very important and meaningful and said full details will be released very soon. This comes just a day after Trump spoke with Russian President Vladimir Putin. We're now joined by Ross Feingold, who's a political risk analyst. He joins us live from Taipei in Taiwan. Ross, thank you very, very much for joining us on the program. Pleasure to get your insight. I want to get your immediate reaction to this news that President Vladimir Zelensky and President Donald Trump have had this phone call just a day after talks with the Russian president from the US. What are your thoughts? How do you think that this diplomatic approach to ending the war is going?
It does show that President Trump is still very personally engaged in trying to bring about a ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine. Now, he's threatened at times to walk away. And a few days ago, we had the news that the United States has paused weapon shipment to Ukraine. And President Trump has certainly expressed frustration at times, both about President Zelensky as well as about President Putin. But the fact that President Trump is willing to have the call with Putin, followed by the call with Zelensky, it does indicate that President Trump, despite anything else he's said or done, he's not given up hope on trying to bring the two sides to a ceasefire.
Ross Feingold, thank you, and we will bring you all the updates as that story develops and we get more information. Moving on now, we move to the Middle East, where the United Nations Human Rights Office says it has recorded at least 613 Palestinians killed while trying to access aid in Gaza. A majority of those deaths, 509, were reported near distribution points operated by the controversial Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which is backed by Israel and the United States. The Gaza Health Ministry puts the overall death toll even higher at over 650, with more than 4,000 others injured. Rights groups have condemned the foundation's aid model, calling its distribution sites, quote, human slaughterhouses. A civil defense official in Gaza said that civilians have been deliberately killed by Israeli forces, including by sniper fire, drone strikes and air attacks targeting families. Let's take a listen in to some of a spokesperson for the United Nations Human Rights Office and what they had to say.
So the latest figures that we have recorded 613 killings, both at GHF points and near humanitarian convoys. Now, this is a figure as of the 27th of June. Since then, I was reading our latest sitrep. There have been further incidents. Colleagues have pointed out the challenges of verifying information because we don't have eyes and ears on the ground. International press is not being allowed, and neither are we. We are doing what we can to try to verify these figures, but there's a time lag, and we will perhaps never be able to grasp the full scale of what's happening here because of the lack of access. On who is responsible, it is clear that the Israeli military has shelled and shot at Palestinians trying to reach the distribution points. How many killings, who is responsible for that? We need an investigation. We need access, we need an independent inquiry, and we need accountability for these killings.
We are once again joined by Ross Feingold, political risk analyst, to discuss this story and further updates from the Middle East. Ross, this ongoing situation with aid distribution points is in headlines constantly. The reports from the United Nations say over 600 people are being killed while trying to access aid to at these Gaza humanitarian foundation points, 4 of which are in North Gaza, 1 of which is in the center. Are these aid sites becoming tools of control rather than belief, do you believe?
Unfortunately, the reality is, according to Israel, the Hamas still is active in the area near the aid distribution sites, and that's leading to hostilities near where people are queuing up to receive the aid packages from the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. You know, that's just what happens in war. This is a combat zone, and we have to keep that in mind. Now, the death of innocent civilians who are lining up for aid is a terrible tragedy. But there is a way to end this, and that would be for Hamas to accept the proposed ceasefire that the United States has put on the table in recent days. But as long as Hamas continues to refuse to agree to a ceasefire, and they want to continue to engage in hostilities with Israel, then there are going to be innocent civilians who die. Again, that's a terrible, terrible tragedy, but that is the reality of a war zone.
Ross, Israel says its strikes and its attacks are direct, and they say that they try and minimize civilian casualties. Over 500, the United Nations reports, have been killed directly at these aid sites. How can Israel say that it is minimizing civilian casualties when it is engaging in combat in such a way near these desperate, some reports say starving people trying to get aid?
It's long been Israel's position throughout the course of this war since October 2023 that they take as many steps as possible to minimize civilian casualties, but that Hamas does embed itself with civilians. And that is true. I don't think there's any falsehoods when Israel says that Hamas continues to embed itself with civilians. And again, it leads to the tragic deaths of innocent civilians, but it brings us back to the same point. We could have a ceasefire, we could have a resumption of aid if Hamas will agree to the terms that have been offered. It's Hamas that doesn't agree to the terms of the ceasefire, and it continues to prevent aid from getting into the civilians who really need it. And we're stuck in a never-ending cycle of a war that just doesn't seem to want to end. And it's really up to Hamas to put down their weapons, to evacuate Gaza, and to allow the day after activities of aid and reconstruction to begin.
Ross, thank you. You are staying with us. We stay in the region where Israel's opposition leader says he met with the United Arab Emirates foreign minister in Abu Dhabi to discuss efforts for a ceasefire in Gaza. Yair Lapid posted a photo of himself with Sheikh Abdullah bin Zayed Al Nahyan on X, saying that they spoke about developments in the region, a possible agreement in Gaza, and the return of hostages. The UAE, which normalized ties with Israel under the US-brokered Abraham Accords in 2020, has close relations with Washington, which is pushing for an end to the war that began after the Hamas attack in October of 2023. The UAE's state news agency confirmed the meeting took place, but did not mention any meeting with President Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed, whom Lapid claimed he also met. In an interview shared on X, Lapid said every country in the region should push Hamas to accept a deal, saying it would benefit both Gazans and Israelis, as well as the region as a whole. We're now joined once again by Ross Feingold. Ross, does Lapid's visit signal a crack in Israel's unity over the Gaza policy? Obviously, what grabs the headlines is the conflict himself, but many people don't know the backdrop of the complicated Israeli politics and opposition to Netanyahu's policy on the war. What can you tell us about that?
It probably won't make Netanyahu happy that Lapid was meeting with senior politicians in the United Arab Emirates. For the most part, when it comes to prosecuting the war in Gaza, or the more recent war with Iran, or earlier the war against Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Israeli opposition leaders have generally stood by Netanyahu, even though they're in the opposition. But as Netanyahu's criminal trial is back in the news again in recent days because of court hearings in that process, some infighting within the Netanyahu-led coalition, the opposition is seeing an opportunity maybe that the government could even fall and bring about a new election. So we can't discount the possibility of a new election in Israel sooner rather than later. So Lapid, of course, is positioning himself to lead a coalition that would take over the government. But we have to keep in mind, at least as of today, the leadership is Netanyahu. It's not the opposition. So the opposition could fly around and meet with the leadership of other countries, but there's only one decision maker at the moment, and that's still Netanyahu.
Yes, Ross, and now let's turn over to Lebanon for our next story, where Hezbollah has begun a major strategic review in the wake of its devastating war with Israel, including considering scaling back its role as an armed movement, though not disarming completely. That's according to three sources familiar with the deliberations. The internal discussions, which are still ongoing, reflect the pressures Hezbollah has faced since a truce was reached in November. Israeli strikes have continued in Hezbollah-held areas, and the group is grappling with financial strains, US demands for disarmament, and diminished political clout. The group's position has also been weakened by regional shifts, including the defeat of its Syrian ally Bashar al-Assad, severing a key supply route from Iran and Tehran's own war with Israel. A senior official said Hezbollah now believes its arsenal, once intended to deter Israel, has become a liability. Under the late Hassan Nasrallah, Hezbollah grew into a regional military force with tens of thousands of fighters, rockets and drones. But Israel's retaliatory offensive has since destroyed much of its arsenal and killed thousands. Hezbollah, however, does not intend to give up all its arms. Sources say it plans to keep lighter weapons and anti-tank missiles as a deterrent. We're once again joined by Ross to discuss this. Could a partial pullback split the group internally, Ross? And what do you have to say about Hezbollah's current capabilities in the region? Hezbollah, of course, is a proxy group whose sole mission is to destroy and damage the state of Israel. What are your thoughts about their current capabilities and this decision they have reportedly made?
They're still dangerous. They're a danger to Israel as long as they retain some of their rockets or other military capabilities. And they're also a danger to Lebanese society. They've operated for decades as a state within a state and an armed state within a state, which has prevented unity and progress in Lebanon. The other communities, the Sunni community and the Christian community, have constantly had to make a deal with Hezbollah to have some form of government, and government is repeatedly not effective and has delivered almost no positive outcomes for the people of Lebanon. So as long as Hezbollah continues to insist on retaining weapons, they're going to be a poison on Lebanese society. And we know from the war that ended with the truce in November, as you mentioned, that Israel has the upper hand. Any movement of weapons, any threat towards Israel, anything that Iran still tries to send through Syria, although that's more difficult with the changing regime, Israel is going to make a move. And they're going to deny Hezbollah the opportunity to ever pose a threat to Israel again. So there's one outcome that is the logical outcome, which Hezbollah probably won't take. But that outcome would be to normalize as a political party and stop trying to be a military movement as well. But I'm not optimistic about that. I think there are, you asked about potential split. There's going to be hardliners in the movement who insist on retaining a military capability. And again, I think as long as they continue to do that, they're going to be a poison in Lebanese society.
Yes, Ross, that wraps up our Middle East stories, but we move over to the United States, where during a rally, President Donald Trump has sparked controversy by using an anti-Semitic slur while discussing his recent spending bill, referring to Shylocks in the context of leaders. Trump was met with criticism as the term is rooted in negative stereotypes about Jewish people, popularized by Shakespeare's The Merchant of Venice. Despite backlash, Trump claimed he was unaware the word could be offensive to Jewish people, stating he understood Shylock as only a term for high-interest moneylenders. This incident echoes a similar one involving Joe Biden in 2014, who later apologized for using the same term. Democratic Congressman Daniel Goldman condemned Trump's remarks as blatant and vile anti-Semitism, while critics noted that despite previous promises to combat anti-Semitism, Trump's actions often contradict his statements. The controversy has intensified discussions on how deeply ingrained anti-Semitic stereotypes continue to surface in public discourse. Ross, we're once again facing more allegations of anti-Semitism. Donald Trump is a staunch opposer of anti-Semitism. We've seen in how he opposes the US universities. Do you think Donald Trump genuinely made a mistake here, or is there something more deeper rooted in this?
Well, as a Jewish American, I'm not thrilled that he used the word, but I would take at face value his explanation that he thought it meant the moneylender at high interest rates. And frankly, that is how the word is often used by people in the United States. I won't speak to other countries, but when people use the word in the United States, they often mean somebody who's lending money at usurious interest rates, and they're not necessarily thinking of Jews or being anti-Semitic. Again, I dislike the word. I would prefer that people don't use it in regular conversation. It is rooted in anti-Semitism, but there are some people who don't realize that. And obviously Trump, through his actions, he's been a big supporter of Israel. His administration has gone after universities for anti-Semitism on campus. His daughter is Jewish. His grandchildren are Jewish. So I don't think we should immediately rush to condemn President Trump for being an anti-Semite.
Yes, Ross, thank you very much. We move on to US foreign policy now, where US President Donald Trump met Saudi Defense Minister Prince Khalid bin Salman at the White House, where the two discussed Middle Eastern security, with Iran topping the agenda, according to Axios. Prince bin Salman said they talked about regional developments and efforts to maintain stability in the region. During his visit, the Saudi minister also held talks with US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth and White House envoy Steve Witkoff after meeting President Trump. He also spoke by phone with Iran's Chief of Staff, Major General Abdul Rahim Mousavi. Ross, what do you think about this relationship with the close now relationship between the Gulf and the United States? Could Saudi back channels ease Trump-Iran tensions, do you think? Well,
the relationship between Saudi Arabia and the United States is very strong. It was strong under the first Trump administration. It was generally strong under the Biden administration. Now it's even stronger under the second Trump administration. We've seen that personified by Trump's visit, by Saudi Arabia's commitments to make a lot of purchases from the United States and to invest in the United States. I don't think the Trump administration is necessarily looking for Saudi Arabia to be the back channel to Iran. There are other Gulf countries that are doing that. The Europeans are also involved as well. So Saudi Arabia doesn't necessarily have to play that role. We have rumors about another round of negotiations between the United States and Iran next week, and the Saudis are not really the main players in that process. But if they could help, if they want to talk to the Saudis and persuade the Saudis to not return to developing nuclear weapons, then I think the region and the United States would appreciate that. But again, I don't think the U.S. is necessarily looking to Saudi Arabia to play that role. And frankly, the Saudis are very suspicious of the Iranians as well. And I think one exemplar of that is when the United States recently attacked Iran. It's not like Saudi Arabia criticized the United States much.
Yes, Ross Feingold, thank you very, very much for joining us on the program. Your insight is always of value. We now move over to Africa, where Rwandan President Paul Kagame has said that he is unsure whether the US brokered peace deal with neighboring Democratic Republic of Congo will hold. The agreement calls for Rwandan troops to withdraw from eastern Congo within 90 days. The United Nations says those forces have been supporting M23 rebels who earlier this year seized the region's two largest cities. Rwanda denies backing M23 and claims its troops are in the area for self-defense, targeting ethnic Hutu militias linked to the 1994 Rwandan genocide, including the Democratic Forces for the Liberation of Rwanda, or FDLR. Kagame told reporters that Rwanda is committed to the deal, but warned it could collapse if Congo fails to neutralize the FDLR. Kagame also warned that if the other side reports to deception and reignites the conflict, Rwanda will respond as it has in the past. He thanked the administration of US President Donald Trump for mediation efforts, saying that if the deal fails, they aren't the ones to blame. Now let's turn back to Europe, where German Chancellor Friedrich Merz called US President Donald Trump to discuss arms deliveries to Ukraine. That's according to a spokesperson for the German leader. The call was first reported by Der Spiegel magazine. We're now joined by John Rossomando, who is the president of Viking Research Associates and a geopolitical analyst. He joins us from Washington, D.C. John, thank you very much for joining us on the program. Do you think this shows Europe's fear of a substantial US pullback from the Ukrainian war efforts? Obviously, we have seen a substantial difference between how President Joe Biden and Donald Trump's second administration has approached the war in Ukraine. What are your thoughts? Is Berlin trying to keep Trump on side over the issue?
Well, I think that Berlin wants to ensure that the Ukrainians rather have adequate arms to deter the Russians. Right now, you have people such as Deputy Secretary of Defense, Undersecretary of Defense Elbridge Colby wanting to cut back arms deliveries to Ukraine, and for the U.S. to focus elsewhere. I think that President Trump wants the Germans and the other European countries to step up to the plate.
Yes, we now move on and we move over to South Asia, where the Indian trade delegation led by Chief Negotiator Rajesh Agrawal has returned to New Delhi after wrapping up a crucial round of talks in Washington on an interim trade agreement. Official sources say the discussions, which ran from June the 26th to July the 2nd, made headway but left key issues unresolved, particularly in the agriculture and automotive sectors. Negotiators are racing against the clock as both sides hope to finalize the deal before the July the 9th deadline, the date when the US is set to reimpose a 26% reciprocal tariff on Indian goods, temporarily suspended for 90 days. India is demanding duty concessions on a range of labor-intensive sectors, including textiles, jewelry, leather, plastics and chemicals. But it's holding firm on sensitive areas, especially dairy, which continue to stall the progress. The US, on its part, is pushing for lower duties on industrial products, agricultural goods and electric vehicles. President Donald Trump has taken a direct approach to global trade, saying he plans to simplify terms by sending out letters to more than 170 countries outlining the tariffs they'll be expected to pay. India and the US hope to use this interim deal as a launch pad for a broader bilateral trade agreement, expected to be in place by September or October, with a serious ambition of goal of doubling trade to $500 billion by 2030. We're now joined by Dr. Jayajit Bhattacharya, who's the president of the CDEPR. He joins us from New York. Thank you very much, Dr. Bhattacharya, for joining us on the program. Do you think Trump's tariff threat could backfire on broader ties? And do you think India is ready to bend on this dairy policy to save this trade deal before July the 9th?
Whether the deal will backfire on the US, I think that's a little complicated question, because it depends on what US really wants to do. Is it really serious about pushing forth with the tariffs when the 9th of July deadline passes? Well, in the past they haven't. They have been, giving a moratorium to these tariffs. So maybe they'll continue with that. From the Indian side, I think the chief negotiator and the minister has made it very clear that they will not follow and be pressurized by deadlines. They will seal the deal when it's right for India from every perspective. And I'm sure the US government would also like to do the same. So there's no point in putting a deadline and a gun on the head and trying to negotiate a deal, which then comes back to bite everyone. And as you said, might come back and be detrimental for the US and be detrimental to India. So it is important that the deal is well thought out, because it's not just a 1 year, 2 year deal. It's a deal that India and US forever signs on to. And therefore, it's important that we look at all the nuances. And one of the key nuances is obviously the dairy market, because that's sensitive from an Indian perspective. Agriculture and dairy are very, very sensitive. And that's sensitive for any market for that matter. It's sensitive in US, it's sensitive in Europe. And it's important that India gives the required protection to millions of people who are involved in the dairy business in India. We have come from a country which was very short of milk to a country which is now self-sufficient and in fact is producing more than it needs in terms of milk. We cannot allow that industrial infrastructure for the dairy industry to be compromised as we move forward. And we do not want to leave something that has been hard-earned from an Indian perspective, and therefore the dairy market becomes very critical for the Indian government.
Yes, Dr. Bhattacharya, you are staying with us for further updates. India's deputy army chief has accused China of providing Pakistan with live intelligence on key Indian military positions during May's deadly border conflict. Lieutenant General Rahul Singh made the allegation on Friday at a defense industry event in New Delhi, urging an urgent upgrade to India's air defense systems. He said India faced two adversaries in that 4-day confrontation, Pakistan on the front lines and China providing the, quote, all possible support. According to Singh, Pakistan's military received real-time data from Beijing, even as Director General of Military Operations were in talks. He claimed a Pakistani official revealed precise knowledge of Indian vectors primed for action, indicating Chinese involvement. Singh did not disclose how India confirmed China was providing that support. The conflict erupted after an attack on Hindu tourists in Kashmir in April. An attack India blamed on Pakistan. Missiles, drones and artillery shells dominated 4 days of intense fighting, marking the worst clash in decades. Both sides eventually agreed to a ceasefire. Pakistan has denied any role in the initial attack. China, Pakistan and Turkey have not responded to these new claims. Meanwhile, India's Chief of Defence Staff previously suggested that satellite imagery was used during the conflict and it could have been commercially sourced, including from China. Singh also claimed Turkey assisted Pakistan during the fighting, supplying Bayraktar drones and other UAVs and trained personnel. The revelation sparked a backlash in India, with social media users calling for a boycott of Turkish products and tourism. Beijing, which has backed Islamabad economically since 2013, publicly supported Pakistan's sovereignty and territorial integrity after the ceasefire. Tensions between India and China remain high despite a 2020 border standoff, though both sides have recently agreed to ease military positions. We're once again joined by Dr. Jayjit Bhattacharya to discuss this in more detail. Dr. Bhattacharya, could this push India to rethink its restraint on striking across the border? And how does this claim prove China's all-weather Pakistan alliance is overturning overtly militarily? I do apologize, Dr. Bhattacharya. I believe your mic is muted.
Am I audible now?
Yes, you are.
Yeah, so my point was that India has been preparing for a joint Pakistan-China front, what we call as a two-front war. And clearly the last conflict proves that that is the reality, because in today's world, information is weaponized. And so the information about Indian troop positions and locations provided by the Chinese military to Pakistan proves that the two-front war situation is a reality. And therefore, China was part of the war that happened, or the conflict that happened, in which the Pakistani military infrastructure got decimated. So in spite of the Chinese support that happened, and Chinese support was limited to the information being shared insofar as we know, there could be more support that was given. Clearly, much of the military hardware that the Pakistan used was from China. And so Chinese involvement in Pakistani military and in the conflict against India was very, very deep. And therefore, it's, India has to look at any Pakistani future intervention in military conflict as a Sino-Pakistani conflict. And that makes the nature of the military conflicts far more sinister. I think as India is already preparing, we need to have a formal doctrine in terms of the response that India will have on China if Pakistan again provides or has a military conflict with India.
Yes, Dr. Bhattacharya, thank you very, very much for joining us on the program. We now move on to our next story, where the Tibetan government in exile could hold more back-channel talks with China later this year, but expects little progress, even given Beijing's hardline position. Speaking to the Reuters news agency, Central Tibetan Administration Chief Penpa Tsering said indirect talks with China have so far yielded no results, and future efforts may also fall flat. He said, quote, "There seems to be no space for any negotiation whatsoever." Tsering's comments come a day ahead of the Dalai Lama's 90th birthday. The spiritual leader and tens of thousands of Tibetans have lived in exile in India since 1959, after a failed uprising against Chinese rule. Why the Dalai Lama has abandoned demands for full independence, he and the exiled community continue to call for genuine autonomy to safeguard Tibet's culture and religion. The Dalai Lama also reaffirmed this week that only his Gaden Phodrang Trust will identify his successor, who he says will be reborn outside of China. Beijing maintains it has the final say on the succession process, a stance rooted in historic claims. China's foreign ministry has yet to respond. We're now joined by Baiyao Teng, who's a Chinese human rights activist located in Washington, D.C. Thank you very much for joining us, Baiyao. Is Beijing's hardline leaving Tibet's back channels pointless? And do you think the Dalai Lama's succession outside China might spark something bigger than what's going on?
Yes, Beijing doesn't want a negotiation, a meaningful talk with Tibet, and there's a fundamental disagreement between Tibet and China, the People's Republic of China. So the reincarnation is one of the most important issues in this conflict. So because of the dictatorial system of China, the Chinese Communist Party can't let every region be autonomous. So not to mention Tibet or the East Turkestan, even any other Han Chinese province cannot be enjoying the high level autonomy. So Beijing want to decide everything. They can't let His Holiness Dalai Lama to recognize his successor.
Baiyao Teng, if Beijing did have its way, what would you expect from the choices of the CCP? Since the Dalai Lama is in exile, why do Beijing care so much about who his successor is?
His Holiness Dalai Lama, together with the Tibetan people, Tibetan diaspora community, have established a democratic system in the exiled government, and China want to maintain its one-party rule. So we have seen the disappearance of Hong Kong's freedom, and that might be a good example for us to understand the future of Hong Kong, the future of Tibet. And Beijing cares the influence of freedom and democracy. Even autonomous Tibetan, if Tibetan people enjoy meaningful cultural, religious autonomy, that will be a threat to Beijing's political regime.
Baiyao Teng, thank you very much for joining us on the program. We will be bringing you all upcoming updates in regards to that developing story there. We stay in the South Asia region, where a 5-story building has collapsed in the Pakistani city of Karachi, killing at least 7 people and injuring 8 others. The incident occurred in the impoverished Layari neighborhood, once considered one of Pakistan's most dangerous areas. Officials say up to 100 people have been living in the building at the time. Rescuers are still searching the rubble, believing more people may be trapped. Karachi Mayor Murtaza Wahab confirmed the death toll, while rescue teams, including the EDHI Welfare Foundation, warned that 8 to 10 people could still be underneath the debris. Let's take a listen in to what a rescue worker and residents had to say.
बिल्डिंग थी जिसपे गवर्नमेंट ने जो लोकल इलाका मकीन बता रहे हैं, लोकल्स बता रहे हैं, वो ये बता रहे हैं कि गवर्नमेंट ने SBCA के तहत जो है वो नोटिस भी इशू किए थे कि बिल्डिंग रहने के काबिल नहीं है, और इसमें आधी बिल्डिंग जो है वो खाली भी हो चुकी थी। और आप मेरे अकब में देख रहे होंगे कि बिल्डिंग गिरी है, इसके ऊपर रेस्क्यू का काम जारी है।
थोड़ी देर के बाद में पता चला तो बिल्डिंग मना गिर गई है। तो मैं ऐसे जो आया हूँ, अब मैं छुट्टी लेके आया हूँ तो इधर देखा हूँ तो कुछ भी नहीं है, खाली बच्चे हमारे बाहर निकल आए और बकाया जो हमारा जितना भी सामान वगैरह वो राग हो गया, ख़त्म हो गया।
मैं चले गया ड्यूटी पे तो 10 बजे वाइफ ने मुझे कॉल की, बोला यार ये दूसरी आवाज़ आई है। तो वाइफ को मैंने बोला आप एक काम करो, नाश्ता वास्ता छोड़ो और बच्चों को लेके अब नीचे उतर जाओ। तो घर में जितने बराबर में जो पड़ोसी है, रिश्तेदार है, वाइफ है, सबको भाई दरवाज़ा नॉक करके बोला भाई आ जाओ।
Excavators and emergency workers struggled to access the narrow alleys, with police being forced to baton charge crowds to clear the way. The building was described as worn out by rescue officials, with structural failures and collapses common in Pakistan, particularly in Karachi, a city of over 20 million people, where poor construction, illegal extensions and lax enforcement of building codes are widespread. Indonesian rescuers have resumed the search for 30 passengers still missing after a ferry sank near Bali more than 35 hours after the tragedy occurred. The ferry, named KMP Tanu Pratama Jaya, was carrying 65 Indonesians when it sank about 30 minutes after departing from East Java on its way to the holiday island of Bali on Wednesday night. Officials say 29 people were rescued on Thursday, while at least 6 people were confirmed dead. Bad weather forced a temporary halt to operations, but the search resumed today with ships, helicopters and hundreds of rescuers battling strong currents and rain in the Bali Strait. Take a listen.
Karena korban yang kemarin itu banyak diketemukan di arah timur ya, jadi ke selatan dan ke timur.
All 65 people on board were Indonesian, including 53 passengers and 12 crew members. Officials stated the ferry was not overloaded. Family members are gathering at rescue centres waiting for news. Dayu maid Silawati, whose husband was on the ferry, said she last spoke to him on Wednesday night. Let's listen in to what she said.
Ke Surabaya, ngambil pakan ternak, nah itu kan baliknya itu dia setiap mau naik kapal itu nyebrang, dia nelpon sempat jam 9 malam kemarin, dia nelpon, Bu, saya udah baru naik kapal. Saya bilang hati-hati ya Pak, nggih. Nanti kalau udah sampai di rumah taruh teraknya di depan toko, pulang. Nanti siang kita sembahyang, itu kan ada odalan. Oh iya Bu, nah itu kan jadi enggak enak dah perasaannya gitu. Berulang-ulang hanya telepon enggak diangkat, enggak kumen-kumen begitu gitu loh. Terus ibunya, saya telepon lagi bosnya, kata Pak Tua ada kapal tenggelam Bu. Nah itu udah tadi saya telepon juga Pak Dewonya enggak nyambung. Saya lihat GPS-nya sekilas gitu kelihatan, dan itu enggak sampai sekarang katanya mati dah. Belum.
The ship had been making regular trips between Bali and East Java. Authorities say transportation safety investigators will probe the cause of the sinking once its search effort is complete. Ferries are a common mode of transportation in Indonesia, a nation of over 17,000 islands, but lacks safety standards and insufficient life-saving equipment, often raise concerns about passenger safety. Now let's move over to the sporting world, where Jamie Smith and Harry Brook launched a thrilling counter-attack against India on day 3 of the second Rothsday Test at Edgbaston. After England slumped to 84 for 5 in response to India's massive 587, Smith's explosive 80-ball century and Brooks's 91 not out turned the tide. Together, they added 165 runs in just 25 overs, taking England to 249 for 5 at lunch. Smith's rapid ton, containing 14 fours and 3 sixes, was the joint third fastest in England's Test history. The pair's remarkable partnership put India on the back foot, narrowing their 338-run lead as England gained momentum. We move on now. Liverpool forward Mohamed Salah has expressed his devastation following the death of his teammate Diogo Jota, who tragically died in a car crash at 28 alongside his brother Andre Silva. Salah described it as extremely difficult to accept, adding that Jota's loss will be felt deeply by everyone at the club. The two were close, with Salah saying he never imagined returning to Liverpool after the break without Jota. The football world mourns the untimely death of both Jota and Silva, with Salah sending his thoughts to Jota's wife, children and family during this unimaginable time. Lewis Hamilton set the fastest time in first practice for the British Grand Prix at Silverstone, edging McLaren's Lando Norris by just 0.023 seconds. Ferrari's Charles Leclerc and McLaren's Oscar Piastri followed in third and fourth. This marks Hamilton's first time topping a practice session this season, excluding the sprint race in China. Meanwhile, championship leader Max Verstappen struggled with his car's balance, finishing 10th. Mercedes' George Russell was 5th, while Alpine's Pierre Gasly and Sauber's Gabriel Bortoleto both had near misses at the high-speed Copse corner. The session saw a mix of new and old floor updates across multiple teams. The White House will host a UFC fight next year to mark the 250th anniversary of American independence. President Donald Trump announced the event will be a championship bout with 20,000 to 25,000 attendants. Trump, a longtime friend of UFC President Dana White, revealed the plans during a speech in Iowa. He also hinted that the White House's vast grounds would be used for the historic event. Trump's ties to the UFC date back over 2 decades, including hosting a fight at Trump Taj Mahal in 2001. The UFC event is part of a broader celebration for America's 250th anniversary in 2026. Spain winger Nico Williams has officially extended his contract with Atletico Bilbao, committing to the club until June of 2035. The 21-year-old turned down lucrative offers, including former interest from Barcelona, citing financial uncertainty at the Catalan club. Williams' new deal stretches his previous contract by 8 years and boosts his release clause to nearly $100 million. The extension is a major win for Athletic Bilbao as they lock in one of their most promising talents ahead of the upcoming European competitions. Well, that is all we have time for. We will continue to bring you more news updates from around the world.